A new legal challenge coming against New York's gun laws in the state. Hear from a state lawmaker on the impacts these laws are having on small business. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. A state law has changed how background checks work for purchasing both guns and ammunition. But a challenge to that law from a group of gun owners is now getting traction all the way up in the Supreme Court. The lawsuit challenges a provision of New York's Concealed Carry Improvement Act, which requires the state police to conduct the background checks for gun or ammunition purchases. That process used to be handled by the federal system and still uses the federal criminal background check system online. The new background checks for ammo purchases bring new fees as well, just under $3 for every ammo purchase.
The gun dealers have to contact the state police, and the state police then contacts NICS in order to get a background check, you know. And anytime you put more steps involved in a complex procedure, it always gets messed up. The only people that are being affected are the lawful gun owners. And if you ask the FBI, you ask the state police, the percentage of lawful gun owners that are involved in violent crimes is minuscule.
Joining us now to give his reaction to this change in New York State's gun laws is State Senator Dan Steck up from Queensbury Way. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
Yep, thanks for having me.
I've seen some of the press releases you put out. You're not a fan of these changes. Talk to me about it.
Well, I mean, first of all, the changes do absolutely nothing to eliminate gun violence or improve public safety at all. But what they do is they hassle the lawful gun owner, and they certainly are a burden on the whole system, including especially all of our small businesses that sell firearms and ammunition. And I say that it does nothing to reduce gun violence because all you have to do is drive to Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and you buy all the ammunition you want. And this also goes a farther step in that now, instead of addressing handguns, you know, there's a pistol permit system, federal firearms laws to be followed. You know, this tries to duplicate a federal system. It does a poor job of it, but we're going to spend $20 million trying to replicate something that the federal government has been doing. But this is going to capture all this information on people buying rifle ammunition, shotgun ammunition. So this isn't about, you know, the 38 special, you know, and trying to prevent gun violence on the streets with pistols that are illegally obtained anyways. This is about hassling law-abiding citizens. It's about an additional tax. And frankly, the system isn't working. What used to be just a regular transaction in a gun store, now people are driving an hour to get to the gun store, find out that they have to wait for this check because the system isn't working well, and they have to leave, go home, and then wait for a phone call days later to buy, or, you know, again, rounds of .22 ammunition. And oh, by the way, a lot of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't know what .22 ammunition is. So it's kind of hard to have a responsible dialogue about gun violence and gun safety and firearms with people that don't have any idea what the difference is between a shotgun and a .22 and a handgun.
Well, this was born out of the Buffalo tragedy that happened. Do you feel that maybe it's the governor trying to do something that she can say to the constituents, see, we did this for you to try to curb the violence? And the other side would say, well, if it stops one person who may have gotten the ammunition who shouldn't have, it's all worth it. What do you say to that argument?
Well, to that argument, if it stops one person, then let's talk about border security. Let's talk about criminal justice reforms and the bail reforms and all that. If fixing the bail reforms just stops one crime from happening, then it's worth fixing these bail laws. I mean, I'll have that conversation with what we've done in New York State 8 days a week. But again, people that are going to commit crimes with guns are going to get ammunition. And again, if you don't want to buy the ammunition here, then you go to Vermont, you go to Connecticut, you go to Rhode Island. They're not lining up in Walmart to buy ammunition to then turn around and go rob a liquor store. You know, there's ways around it for a criminal to get ammunition.
Is there an upstate downstate split on this kind of an issue where if you're polling how many people in Manhattan hunt, it'd probably be a much lower number than, say, Columbia County, Greene County, Warren County, up around where you are? Is there some of that at play where you mentioned they might not know what a .22 caliber is versus a .38 caliber? Is it not an issue of just it's not part of their world?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. And I think that's when, you know, a smart legislator will listen to people that are experts. I don't tell people from New York City how to safely ride the subway, you know, and I resent them coming up here and telling us how to safely use firearms or, you know, what trees to cut down. You know, I mean, so you need to listen to the people that have been elected in areas where these issues are well known and commonplace. Again, you talk to law enforcement, they're going to tell you this law doesn't do anything to improve public safety. Nothing, not a thing.
Going inside of
it's
it,
gonna drive out.
going inside of it a little bit. If you, let's say you're a hunter and you went to get some, or maybe you go to the shooting range a lot, and you buy a box of 22s, and they go through the whole background check, and maybe it takes a day or two, and everybody feels good you got through it, and then you go through those in 3 weeks, and you go back in 3 weeks to the same shop. Do you have to go through the process again, or do they just look and say, oh, it's Dan, he was just here,
No.
we just did one? How does that work? Is it, you get
You have to go through the process again. You have to pay the added tax again for the transaction. And again, you're going to go in there and you're going to be standing in line, and you're going to be giving verbally to a teller who's going to take your information down, and anyone in the earshot is going to hear you give all your personal information, including social security number. Now, for the federal law to buy a firearm, providing the social security, first of all, none of this information is done verbally. It's all done written down on a federal form. The state didn't want to do that. The state wants the clerks and the shops to manually collect this information orally. And you're going to buy a firearm. Providing your social security number is optional. But in New York, if you're going to buy a box of 22s, you have to give that clerk your social security number. And the thing is, with the way the system is set up, that clerk, if that store has an online system, that clerk can go home later that day and pull up the store's site and get your personal information, do Lord knows what with that. So there's an identity theft issue here. And again, that the state is going much farther in requiring the collection of a social security number verbally at the counter that the federal government doesn't require when you buy a firearm. And again, you are just going to open people up to identity theft issues as well. So, this is not designed to improve public safety. This is, if nothing else, this is designed to send a message to a constituency that we're going to do something. But just neighboring Vermont, almost no gun laws, other than if you commit a crime with a gun, you're going to get hammered. But as far as regulating sale of firearms and ammunition, almost none of that compared to New York. And guess what? No problem with gun violence. So, the idea that more is required in New York, and again, the system is not working. The system is not stopping anyone that's wanting to commit a crime to go and buy ammunition in another state, and they do that now for beer and now and tobacco, and now they're going to do it for ammunition as well.
So you do think it's going to be a financial impact for, like, especially a small store that might be had its loyal customers who live in that area. Now maybe they say, look, I love you, but I'm going to drive 40 minutes away to Vermont and just stock up and not worry about it.
That is exactly what's already happening, and I am hearing from the small gun owners, the small gun store owners in my district, that is happening right now. And so it's you're going to hurt small businesses in New York that have been doing business for a long time and following the law and doing it responsibly. You're hassling law-abiding gun owners. Again, the thief or the criminal that wants to commit a crime with a gun, they're going to get a gun, and they're certainly going to be able to get ammunition. The idea that this is going to somehow slow down violence and crime. Again, if the state that my colleagues that passed this law were really serious about addressing crime, then let's go back and revisit those failed bail reform laws. Let's do something about migration. Let's focus on those issues. If it saves just one life, to quote you, in that argument, well, then let's look at the bail reform, because that's costing us lives. Let's look at our migration policies, because that's caused all kinds of problems. That's an argument I'll have with if that's the standard for doing something, then I got a list of stuff to talk about.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. State Senator Dan Steck, thank you for joining us on this Sunday. We do appreciate you making the time for us.
My pleasure. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Election season right around the corner, with advocates across the state making the push to get people registered to vote. When we come back, Jamie DeLine will speak with members of the League of Women Voters on their effort to get people registered. If you have a comment or story idea, please let us know about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on X, formerly known as Twitter, at WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. Voting advocates around the state turning their attention to fall elections this month. The general election is on November the 7th. Our Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine speaking with voting advocate on their effort this month to get people registered to vote.
With election season right around the corner, we're checking in with advocates on their efforts to get people registered to vote. To help with this, I'm joined by Erica Smitka with the League of Women Voters. Erica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
So for people that don't know, there are some qualifications in order to get registered to vote. What are those qualifications exactly?
Of course, you have to be a citizen of the United States. You have to be if you're going to register in your county, you've got to be in that county for, I believe it's 30 days. And when you register to vote, you'll have to provide some form of ID just the first time, whether it be a driver's license or a social security card. Those are some of the basics. I'm sure there's a couple other more specific details, but.
And it's so important to be registered to vote, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the easiest things you can do to participate in your own community and in your democracy is by registering to vote and then getting out there to vote on Election Day.
Now, what exactly has the League of Women Voters been doing to try to get more people registered?
Absolutely. So we've been participating, for example, a few days ago was National Voter Registration Day. And so we had we're at over 500 events across New York State working to register voters. And then nationwide, we registered over 100,000 voters so that people are ready to vote on Election Day. There are thousands of people who go to vote on Election Day, and whether they just, they forgot that they hadn't registered, or there might be, maybe they moved and they didn't they didn't re-register to indicate that they moved. And for whatever reason, it makes it really difficult for them to vote on the day of. So we've been doing everything we can to make sure that everybody that's eligible in New York State is registered and ready to go before November 7th.
Now, if someone does want to register, how do they go about doing that?
The easiest thing to do, New York State now has online voter registration. So you can use the online voter registration tool on the State Board of Elections website, or you can find your local League of Women Voters, or often any town or city buildings such as City Hall, your library. There are many places that have voter registration forms easily available, but the easiest way to do it now is to go online.
And there's a deadline to do so, right?
Absolutely. So this year marks the first year that voters will be able to register to vote and vote on the same day. The deadline to register is October 28th, and that's also the first day of early voting in New York State. So that is something really unique that voters should absolutely take advantage of, that you can do that registration and then head out and vote just right on the same day, which is great.
And I was going to ask you about early voting. What are the timeframes this year?
So early voting starts October 28th, and it will run for 9 days. And the times vary by day, so make sure to take a look. If you're in New York City, you'll be designated one early voting location, but if you are anywhere else in New York State, you'll probably have a couple that you can choose from. So go online to your County Board of Elections website, and you can find out the exact times per day. They tend to vary a little bit to accommodate voters who might be able to make it really early in the morning, or voters who might not be able to make it until later on in the evening.
And what are the qualifications for absentee voting?
For absentee voting in New York State, there's a long, maybe a handful of qualifications. If you're not going to be able to be in your county on the day of the elections, then you can vote by absentee. If you are a caregiver for someone and you're not able to make it out of the house, you can vote absentee. If you are a person with disabilities who is not able to make it to your voting location, you can also vote absentee. If you go online to the State Board of Elections website, they'll give you the whole list of reasons for why you can register to vote absentee.
And within the next year, there will be some big races. Can you talk about those elections that will be coming up?
Absolutely. So this year's a local election year, which we unfortunately don't always get as many voters turning out in local election years. We tend to see a lot more voters turning out in these presidential election years. But we've seen time and time again that a lot of the issues that we're consistently facing in our communities are local issues. So whether it be what we teach in our curriculums, whether it be police reform, whatever these issues might be, it really comes down to things that are handled on the local level. So first of all, I just want to put a plug in to say that everyone should get out and absolutely vote in their local elections this year. But in 2024, it will be a presidential election year. We'll see a pretty significant ballot initiative on the ballot. The New York State Equal Rights Amendment will be on the ballot. But really, it's going to be that presidential race that is, I think, going to bring a lot of voters out to the polls.
And if you're a young person, you can also pre-register to vote as well.
Absolutely. Legislation signed just yesterday or on Wednesday by the governor will help to expand pre-registration by encouraging schools to set up to make it easier for students to pre-register at schools. But if you are 16 or 17 years old, you can pre-register in New York State. And once you turn 18, your registration will automatically become active, for lack of a better word. But it's a great way to make sure you're registered so that you don't have to worry about it later on.
And everyone, when they talk about voting, they talk about it being your civic duty. Can you go into a little detail about that?
Absolutely. So I always come back to the same saying that, a democracy isn't a democracy unless we hear the voice of each and every citizen that's a part of that democracy and a part of our own community. And so we want to make sure that all of the voters that show up to the polls are really representative of each and every person in our community. And so it is your civic responsibility, your civic duty to show up and to let your voice be heard. Because it's those people who are in power, those people that are elected, that are really going to make some pretty they're going to make decisions that will impact your life day to day, whether it's a local election or a national election. So it really is your job to get out and let your voice be heard so that politicians can hear from their own communities.
Erica Smitka, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, as always.
Thanks so much.
New York's asylum seeker situation continues to develop, the influx already having an impact on the state's budget. When we return, we'll take a closer look at how the economic impact may affect next year's budget. If you got a comment or story idea, please let us know about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. We're also reach out on X, formerly known as Twitter. You'll find us at WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray here in Albany. As the state continues to supply appropriate resources for this ongoing migrant crisis, what does this mean for the future of the New York State budget? Our Capitol correspondent Amel Taliji has the details.
This past budget, New York State has set aside $1 billion to help with migrants entering New York City. But that number has since grown to 125,000 migrants seeking asylum.
Just people should know, if they are wondering what our commitment thus far has been, I mean, none of it was projected, but we had to meet the needs. And that's what we did. That's why we set aside money.
Just yesterday, Governor Hochul announced deploying an additional 150 National Guard members to help with case management, an endeavor that requires more money. The state has also picked up expenses for legal services and shelter costs.
Floyd Bennett Field, Creedmoor Psychiatric Facility, Randall's Island. The state stepped up and said we'll cover those costs fully. Some of them run $300 million.
The governor said the state will be covering 45% of the city's housing cost. How this will impact the future of New York State budget is to be determined.
And so the answer is, how much money will I need in next year's budget? We know that we'll have to hit at least a baseline of what we've done before. We're making commitments that'll go into the future. And so we're making those estimates right now, but it'll be substantial.
And with Congress failing to pass funding legislation, we could be facing a government shutdown.
I mean, the shutdown just means that you don't function properly. And we're a better country than that.
But Hochul says this could impact work authorizations for migrants.
And this is something that within our control. I'll keep the National Guard there. I'll keep bringing in people. I'll still let the federal government use state space, but they may not need it. And that's our concern, is that this could have an effect.
Government funding would expire October 1st, the start of the federal budget year. Reporting in Albany, Amel Taliji.
A new order by the State Department of Education banning the use of facial recognition technology in schools across the state. This new order follows privacy concerns back in 2020 of the Lockport Central School District in Western New York. School administrators said the idea was to enable officers to quickly respond to potential threats, But a new report by the State Office of Information Technology Services, well, that says the technology often issues false positive for racial and gender minorities. Stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a bit. If you have a comment or story idea, please let us know about it. Email us at news@news10.com, or you can reach out on X, formerly known as Twitter, at WTEN. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, we are returning to the ongoing situation surrounding these New York gun laws, the new ones. Earlier this half hour, you heard from State Senator Dan Steck on the challenge he says New York's laws pose to legal gun owners. Next week, tune in, and we'll hear from a rebuttal from Assemblyman Phil Steck, who had this to say.
Well, everyone's a law-abiding citizen until they're not. So there are many states that have this. New York didn't have it in exactly this form. We added in ammunition because then you can tell if someone is buying large quantities of ammunition, that's probably not a good sign.
For now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm John Gray in Albany. We'll see you right here next week. And don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's a full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across the great state of New York.